Right. Hello and welcome to this Reuters Events webinar, which is in partnership with Gearteka Group. Thank you so much for joining here today. And I want to thank all of our speakers, Mark, Sita, Andreas, Luke, and another Mark for joining. As I said, thank you to Gearteka for partnering with us. This webinar will touch on sustainable supply chains within heavy duty vehicle goods in Europe. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Sita Hogslag, who's the Europe Director from Coalstart Drive to Zero, who has kindly agreed to moderate this session. So over to you, Sita.
Thank you very much, Becky. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sita Hogslag. I work for Coalstart Drive to Zero. Coalstart is an NGO originated in California with more than 30 years of experience in sustainable transport. So about 6 years ago, we started a global program called Drive to Zero, which really aligns nations and industry along specific targets for zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles. So we have 38 countries that have joined the initiative and about 190 companies, all aiming towards 30% new sales by 2030 and 100% by 2040. And I'm really grateful to be moderating this session today because it's all about collaboration, and I feel very strongly about that. So on our panel today, we have Mark Allen, Senior Director from Pepsi, Luke Bellinger, Senior Manager for Strategic Sourcing from Mars, Andreas Zink, President from the European Chemical Transportation Association, and Mark Mulder, who will be joining us very shortly, Chief Commercial Officer for Gearteka Group. So maybe as a little bit of an introduction, because collaboration and supply chain is a really big topic. Right? So we all know that Europe's supply chain is very complex, very fragmented. There's connected industries across borders, and road transport within that really plays a key role. So it is responsible for around 25% of the total CO2 emissions, and the demand for goods is only increasing, and the emissions aren't going down as quickly as we need them to. So we really see a transition to greener alternatives, with a specific focus on zero emission commercial vehicles being a part of that solution. We see that the technology is there, we see that the ambition is there, and we see regulation happening more and more within the European context. So welcome, Mark. So we see two pieces of legislation in this space. The first one is the CO2 truck standard, which was recently passed in May, which really ensures there is a basic supply of these vehicles on the market. So the CO2 standards for heavy duty vehicles mandates all producers and importers of vehicles to reduce their CO2 emissions by 90% in 2040 and 45% by 2030. If they do not do so, these manufacturers will receive fines. So this was a big piece of legislation that was just passed in May, so very recently. You can't drive an electric truck without is the charging piece, which is the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation. So this passed a while ago and encompasses all segments, but we see for heavy duty vehicles, so road transportation, that there will be a minimum of one charging hub every 60 kilometers around the TEN-T core, and one every 100 kilometers around the TEN-T network, so the main roads in Europe. So, you know, ambitions there, regulations there, we all want this. It's not happening fast enough. So I think that's what we're going to be talking about today with the speakers. And we really want to go from, okay, what is it from this ambition and how do we work together to make sure that we're implementing and deploying quickly enough? So I know Mark isn't here from Gearteka, so I'll maybe hand it over to Luke first. So maybe you can shortly introduce yourself and Mars and your ambitions on this topic from Mars, but really focus in on what factors are really slowing down the implementation from Mars's perspective. And how do you approach this and what solutions do you see?
Thanks, Sita. So firstly, nice to be here. My name is Luke Bellinger. I'm responsible for logistics procurement for Northern Europe. I suppose I'd answer the question slightly differently, look at what we can do to accelerate it. And I start on as a shipper. Mars is committed to reaching net zero emissions across our full value chain by 2050, with a a 50% reduction target in 2030. So, as you touched on there, as part of this roadmap, we've got three key levers. The first being reducing kilometers by better truck fill, etc. The second will be by mode switch to already existing technologies, such as rail and waterways. But the key, and as we're here to talk about, is the use of biofuels and electric trucks. So it's our responsibility as a shipper to create demand. Ultimately, earlier this year, we committed to plans to introduce 300 fully electric vehicles of electric heavy duty trucks across Europe by 2030, which is only part of the plan. Will only sort of doesn't come close to fully meeting our ambitions. But that, amongst a plethora of other opportunities, we need to create the demand, start to really back ourselves and put ourselves out there by embracing these new technologies. And if I talk about what the carriers can do, it's about that. So our collaboration is key. We need logistics experts to really embrace new technology and develop those new solutions for us, whatever that may be. The technology is there, but how can we better utilize that? And it's hard. As a shipper, we've got used to the diesel network, right, where assets are very heavily sweated. And that's where I see the carrier's key part in this is being able to say, actually, we've got complementary customers. We can really sweat these assets to make it a really viable option to embrace these new technologies. We talk about what's slowing it down. That the infrastructure is not there yet, and you touched on it. There's great plans, but I think it's important that we don't just wait for that infrastructure to be there. We've all got a part to play to accelerating that, creating the demand, and therefore the supply to make it viable.
Great, thank you, Luke. And I think that combination or the connection that you just mentioned between the shippers and the carriers and how, things will need to change to make that collaboration work for these new types of vehicles is very, very important. So moving over to Mark Allen from Pepsi. Maybe similarly, you could just briefly introduce yourself and what Pepsi is doing in this space. And really curious to hear what you're preparing in the next 3 years, both for your own, but also your Scope 3 emissions. So looking at the carriers that you contract.
Okay, thanks, Rita. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. Look, I'm Mark. I look after the climate and water transition for Pepsi Europe. So Scope 1, 2, and 3. Obviously, you can see on the background here, Pep Positive, we launched a couple of years ago, which is our PepsiCo program to make the transition. Some of it's easier than others, and you probably all know that Scope 1 and 2 is probably the easier side. Scope 3 is the harder side to transition. So making good progress on Scope 1 and 2 with our own asset base, because I guess it's in our control. Scope 3, we realised, I think, about 18 months ago that this is going to be much harder. So we took a little bit of a different tack this year, and we've been trying to drive the co-action with suppliers. Similar to what Luke was talking about, really, is we got actually early part this year, everyone together, 200 of our top suppliers across Europe, to try and work out what are the blockers and what are the unlocks required. Good session, actually, and a load of learning from both sides. And what we learned, there's a couple of things, is how do we aggregate demand? And PepsiCo and other businesses like ours can catalyze that discussion. So by getting people into the same room, the amount of conversations that then happened said, oh, you're shipping potatoes, and you're shipping finished goods here. Maybe there's a link. So what we've then worked on for most of this year is trying to work out in different bits of the geography, which are the routes that are shared by our multiple suppliers and some of our customers. And then you can pull that demand and then work with shippers to go, actually, there's a route here in Germany from da-da-da-da. Can we try and electrify that route? Because then all this demand is... So it's trying to foster that type of discussion is where we spent a lot of effort. Look, end of this year, we should have about 400 EVs on the road. They're not the big ones, they're the little ones, but at least we're starting to learn. So the other bit is we've learned very much on trying to just take our business as it is now and just electrifying those routes isn't going to work, because you need to think so differently that the EVs have got certain constraints, etc. So how do you then drive efficiency changes to pay for the on cost is the other dilemma with us. And us thinking that we knew we were the best, we knew how to drive efficiency in our own supply chain, the realization was maybe other people can do it better, and working with people to then optimize our routes for EVs, we then learn and have learned. So my second point really, apart from coaction, is trying to learn fast on little trucks, and then you can scale them into bigger trucks. Obviously, with beverages for us is very heavy volume. So in Germany, we're now stepping into how do we pilot beverages in Germany, to try and learn on the heavier routes that can't go as far, etc. So I guess those are the two bits of learning for us over the last couple of years. And yeah, we've done rail, etc. things that I think modal, and we're trying to steer away a little bit from HVO. And we've got volume in HVO, but I think that's going to be capped at a certain point. So really pushing the focus into EV now, particularly with the legislation changes, is our main focus. Hope that helps a little bit.
Yes. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I think the point that you're making, where it's really about optimizing the routes and the transport and not just replacing one vehicle with the next, because then it won't fit. It's really a new puzzle that we're trying to make. So laying that puzzle and then needing to build new relationships with players that, you know, probably never been within scope, is really important. And you did mention rail as well, which I think is an important, you know, the focus of this session will be on road transport, but I think is an important kind of scope that we need to realize is also there in Europe. And maybe moving to Andreas Zink, similarly, maybe you can just introduce yourself shortly and what the Alliance is doing with regards to decarbonization and how you really view the road freight transport today into its journey for decarbonization.
Well, thank you, Sita. Yeah, ACTA stands for, as you said, European Chemical Transport Association, and our members are the major logistic and transport service providers for the chemical industry in Europe. And the movement of chemical products in Europe has two particularities. One is that we talk about mid and long distance, because chemical plants chemical plant is a huge investment. You cannot move them very quickly and very easily. Normally they are at port because the feedstock has to be delivered by ships. Feedstock is crude oil. And then the customers are very flexible and they are going more east and wherever in Europe. So we talk about mid and long distance journeys of 500 kilometers and plus. And we talk about heavy duty. So our trucks are the 40 tons, the 44 tons. And when we talk about zero emission trucks or zero emission technology, alternative powertrains, BEVs, hydrogen, etc., for the movement of chemical products, technology is not there yet. And it will not be there in 2030, but we need to act today. So in saying that, the challenge we face today, or the two challenges we face today, is first, we need to decarbonize our transport. And we have a second issue, which is the lack of truck drivers. And how we react on that is combined transport. I mean, you said, Sita, that this is focused on road transport, but we see it as land transport. And we see it in a combination road and rail, where the longest distance is of the transport is executed by an intermodal network. So we reduce the job on the road for the pre and on carriage, which is normally short distance, where the technology today might help us. And okay, BEV is still not there. We have some projects running within our members, but I see more on the short term, more the use of alternative fuels like HVO or LPG. As long as it is available, we do not have a pan-European coverage of alternative fuels, not enough. So the sourcing is an issue. And we have a daily job for drivers. We try to overcome the lack of truck drivers by offering them a daily job from the morning to the evening and not being out for weeks and away from the family, etc., etc. So for us, the low-hanging fruit to decarbonize European land transport is intermodal combined transport. But unfortunately, there are some hurdles. First of all, is the rail infrastructure, especially in Germany, is a huge issue. We face enormous delays, we face enormous interruptions. And secondly, Europe is unfortunately, when we talk about the rail business, not one Europe. We do not have a European rail. The European Commission names it the lack of interoperability. If you believe or not, we have to change locomotive drivers at every European border because the signals are still in local language. In Germany, a locomotive driver is not allowed to drive more than 250 kilometers from home, even for public trains. So we need to work on those parameters, and not later than this evening, I will have the possibility at a dinner event at the European Parliament to talk to some of the members of the European Parliament how we can improve this intermodal network, how we can come to a European rail, as I call it, because we strongly believe that combined transport is one of the low-hanging fruits. It is existing already today. Just to give you a number, ACTA members last year executed 2.1 million full truckloads by combined transport. We can translate this that we managed to bring 8,400 trucks from the road to the rail. And this is not only for decarbonization, it's also for other topics very important. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, again, it's so important to optimize the vehicle with the transport you want to make. So for Europe, especially, rail seems like such a logical solution, especially for the longer haul. And we're not there yet because the local languages, and many other challenges, I think, that are still there within the rail sector. So thank you for highlighting those. Moving to Mark. Similarly, Mark, Gearteka Group, I think, is really one of the leaders in this space, and we're really curious to hear your vision on sustainable road transport and what you think we need to ensure this sustainable road transportation for the future.
Thanks, Sita. And first and foremost, apologies for technical glitch that I had. We're in the industry in a transition period, and the transition period actually requires a different approach on what is the available technology, how can we leverage the technology now, and how can we actually bring, let's say, the stakeholders in the supply chain together to fast pace through the transition period. And our view is that neither one of us can actually do this alone. In this transition period, it requires the logistic service providers, obviously, it requires the shippers, but it also requires the local and European government to enable us to get through this transition period. What we actually try to do is create, first and foremost, awareness with our customers. You see a different landscape depending on the customers, and I'm happy to hear what Luke and Mark just mentioned. It is about collaboration, co-creation, and that's the only way to actually get us all through this transition period. We aim as much as possible to continue to test the available technology. But if you actually want to sustainably implement alternative solutions, it is about taking a longer-term view together with the shippers, but also together with the OEMs. And then in that three-party arrangement, come to those type of agreements where actually the benefits and the risks are being shared in order to reduce the, let's say, the TCO on the short term, which we all know new technologies are slightly more expensive than existing technologies. That's on one hand aiming at new technologies like electric trucks. We are within Giteca mostly focusing on long distance transport work. We know that the technology is not there. So actually the technology is a roadblock at the moment. Drive 600-700 kilometers a day before you hit the other roadblock, which is at the end of the day, the driving hours of a driver. I do see technology change, and I think over the next few years, and whether, as Andreas said, it will be 2030 or slightly later, but technology is changing, and it's rapidly changing at the moment. But in order to facilitate that change, it needs the co-creation and collaboration with all parties in the supply chain.
Thank you, Mark. And I think one of the things that you mentioned with raising awareness with your customers really links very nicely to one of the questions in the chat. So one thing we didn't mention is that although the chat publicly is closed, you can actually submit a question through the question and answers button in the space, and then we can address them as they come in. So maybe Mark from Pepsi, on this topic of awareness, like how do you demonstrate the return on investment of the sustainable transport solutions looking for to your stakeholders?
If I'm honest, it's been tricky because everything you want to do costs more money. I think was the tricky bit. What we tried to do, we looked at, do we put a carbon number on it? What we ended up doing for all of the carbon levers in scope 3 is attaching $1 per ton of carbon. So we looked at, we can bench all the levers in scope 3 from agriculture through to fleet, through to packaging that we use, and we know the cost estimate for decarbonising that. So therefore, activating some of the more efficient levers rather than the very expensive levers is a way of selling it, because you can say, look, we've got to do this target because our target is net zero 2040, da, 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 da. You can get there a very expensive way, or you can get there a cheaper way. So trying to show that we're being cost efficient in that, look, we bench them all and we're trying to target the cost efficient levers down here, which transport fits in. And actually we have a threshold, I think we use around $200 per ton as a threshold number to say, look, if it's above that, forget it. If it's below that, can you compress it? Can you do better on efficiency, working with the suppliers, or can you localize some product? So actually it becomes, can we localize sourcing rather than in the old days you used to have a factory and then you ship it everywhere. Nowadays, because of the cost of EV being higher, localizing becomes a better thing. So you take the transport miles off the, I know shippers don't want to hear that, but taking the miles off the road completely and avoiding the transport in the first place becomes a much better, and I think COVID taught us a little bit of that trick, if I'm honest, of localizing supply. And I know a lot of the businesses have done it. So creating that, we call it an abatement curve, which is the cost to abate all the levers. Right, this lever is at this end, therefore it's below the threshold, kind of gets us over the hurdles with our stakeholders.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So it's quite a holistic approach that you're taking. And maybe a question to Luke also on this specific kind of how do you even track or measure or report carbon emissions? And is that done kind of for each shipment separately? Is it real time? Like, how do you get a grasp about like your emissions and, you know, what you need to?
Yeah, sorry, it's similar to Mark. I probably don't think we've gone as far as having a target price per carbon yet, although there's plenty out there. But like you said, what we're trying to do is attach a carbon cost to every shipment. So trying to do that at sort of system level, at master data level. So we're at that stage of the journey now. So I feel that we're in a good place of being able to start to effectively and sort of credibly report what we're doing, the change we're making. Every time we bring an electric vehicle into our network, we can really credibly see what the impact that's having. The return on investment, as Mark said, it is difficult, and how do you? It's probably opportunity led. I think we're still at a stage where there's not enough opportunity to match our ambition yet, and that therefore we have to create those opportunities with collaboration, like Mark from Giteka said also. But yeah, the key is measuring, and we have to change the way we, I think, present our value now. The traditional pounds and pence as the single measure of success is probably changing now, and actually going forward, I think there'll be more scrutiny over not just your, whether it be profitability or however that organization's measured, but also the impact you're having on the planet.
And is that something that can be put into dollars? Because it's very hard to compare, kind of, if that's a monetary decision being made. How do you weigh this except for carbon pricing?
And that's the difficulty at the moment. I think that's the difficulty, right? At the moment, you can potentially argue it off against a carbon credit, or as Mark said, a cost per carbon. But it's difficult to have that tangible sort of cost per carbon. But ultimately, we've got the same goal. Most organisations now have committed to a net zero. So it's about forging a path to get there. In the most efficient way. Organisations have still got to make sure they're viable organisations as well. So there's got to be a balance. But it's very difficult to kind of I think, still put a price, a realistic and tangible price on carbon at the moment.
Yeah. Maybe just a curious question from one of the participants. You mentioned, Mark from Pepsi, 300 trucks by 2030. What was that decision based on? So 300 electric trucks by 2030.
That was
or was
that
it
was
just
me.
it
was
sounds
us. It was
really
me, Sita.
nice? Oh, that was you. Sorry.
Yeah. It's a really good question. And if I'm honest, it's I suppose a part plan to a larger plan. I think 300 was done based on a network study, what's feasible, and theoretically based on geographies, distances that are being travelled, current infrastructure. And so that 300 was a realistic and credible target that we thought ambitious still, but a realistic and ambitious target that we could achieve. But it doesn't get us to 50% by 2030. That isn't going to be the silver bullet solution. So we've got strategic partners that we work with to achieve that. But yeah, it was a sort of model data-led decision to go with 300. But the ambition thereafter is far greater also.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Maybe Mark from Giteka. Beyond kind of what the regulatory requirements are, what proactive measures are you taking to decarbonize the fleet itself?
At the moment, it's making sure that the traditional fossil trucks are of the latest standards. So we continue to focus on having a young age of assets in the fleet. Whilst at the same token, we continue to work with the OEMs to be there, ready and available to test the latest new technologies. But then again, you come to the question, which shippers in the supply chain you can actually attract to start testing. And testing, I think, is very relevant for all of us going forward to make sure that we move on this fast-paced decarbonization path. And testing is about test, adapt, and evolve, basically, and that repeatedly doing so. At the same token, also within Giteka, already for many, many years, we try to move business away from road to rail. And also on that journey, we continue to work. And one of the, call it almost dreams I have, but actually we're in good discussions with certain stakeholders in that supply chain, is that we actually connect rail with electric vehicles as well. because traditionally the first and last miles in the model is within a 200-kilometer range of the pickup and delivery points, and that, given the current state of the technology, makes electric vehicles in our segment, the heavy duty 40-44 tons, suitable. And if you can then have a good discussion with the other stakeholders in that supply chain on making sure that the charging infrastructure is actually positioned in such a way that you do not have to go through additional mileage to recharge the vehicle. I think if we are capable of coming to that point, then you would almost say, hey, here we've got a solution where from end to end, actually, we've done our bit on fully decarbonizing certain cargo flows.
I really share that dream of yours, of a rail and then an electric truck and an optimized route. I think it's probably closer than we think if we find the right collaborations, right?
I think so. I think it's close, but it does require all of us to take that extra step and realize that, yeah, we're in a transition period, and probably the cost might be slightly higher at the beginning. But the earlier we all start to pick up on those costs, the faster the cost will actually come down.
Yeah, and I think one cost that is always hard to bring to the present is the cost of inaction and how much it will cost if we don't do anything, right? So I think that's always something to keep in the back of our minds. Maybe moving a little bit back to one of the things said before on HVO. So question for Mark from Pepsi. Why is this transition, you mentioned something, you're not focusing so much on HVO anymore, and could you elaborate a little bit on that decision?
I can, otherwise we could get into an HVO discussion, but I'll keep it brief.
Yes, keep it short.
So we see it as a transition medium, so it's something to help us transition and decarbonize in the immediate. Ultimately, you know, the demand in Europe outstrips the supply, so you then start importing, and then that comes with a whole load of problems. I think supply will be capped, therefore you can do an in our glide path transition. It's there as a part, but it's not the end game. So great, use it now. Okay, let's learn on EV fast and accelerate that. But I think framing it as the solution means that we don't make progress on EV is my worry internally. So saying, yeah, we're going to do it short term, but we're trying to focus on EV and test and pilot and learn as fast as we can has to be the momentum and direction.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark. And one, it's more of a sharing, but I do want to share it with everyone here. And a question is that there is a mention of, you know, hesitancy around the technological constraints around electric trucks. But one of the attendees mentions that industry is currently proving that you can drive long haul with the latest truck battery capacities and recharge sufficiently during the 45-minute break, which is mandatory for all drivers, so that you can reach even 700 to 800 kilometers a day. I realize that is a paper reality, but we are seeing that the technology is ready. And what, in your opinion, and I kind of leave it open to who wants to respond to this, is the main thing holding us back from moving from paper to this? Is it corporate hesitance? Is it government funding? Is it lack of clarity of where infrastructure will be? Like, what do you see? Or is it all of the above, right? That could also be an answer. Like, from your perspective, what is the main thing holding us back from this reality that is real on paper, at least, and in some use cases, maybe, to like scaling up and making this accessible?
If I can kick off, I think it was all the above. Yes, if you have the most perfect route where you can deploy an electric truck, that perfect route needs to make sure that the charging infrastructure is available and actually allowing you to charge the vehicle whilst you're on the 45 minutes hour break for the driver. And at the moment, there is no such thing as a perfect route. If you look at fossil fuels, you'll probably find a gasoline station every 15, 20 kilometers apart. If we talk about charging stations for electric trucks, that is still a big challenge. If you look at the corridors along the main highways in Europe, then only now and just recently you see that governments like in Germany, like in France, are actually investing or say that they've made a large budget available for investments in that infrastructure. And yes, while on paper, on a perfect route, a fully electric truck can do the long haul. If somebody can indicate to me where that perfect route is, actually also matching the supply chain of the customers, then by all means reach out, because we'll test it straight away.
Yes, thank you, Mark. And I think that's part of being in a transition, right? Where there is always going to be a level of uncertainty, and there's not, the infrastructure is ready, and then, you can develop your business based on that. It's all happening in parallel. And I think recognizing the need for collaboration, that it needs to happen in parallel, and that certain risks will be necessary, but then, how to make those acceptable risks so that the business doesn't suffer too much. So maybe one part of the conversation can be around, what are examples of this new collaboration? Like, one question is around, is there strategic warehousing or hub locations that you're looking at to reduce the longer haul and make it more fitting to electric trucks, for example? Or is there a limitation with infrastructure? Because we do know that for return to depot, a lot of the charging is cheaper if you do it at your depot, especially if you have solar panels or other solutions. Like, a lot of the trips might actually already be possible at scale. So could you provide maybe, Luke first, some examples on what are those differences in collaboration that you're seeing that we can share with others as inspiration?
Yeah, Sita, you touched on it there. I think we've got 14 heavy-duty electric vehicles in the European network at the moment, based primarily in Germany and the Netherlands. All of our solutions at the moment are based on either us or the carrier having that charging infrastructure, that return to depot, a closed loop system. And that's the approach we're taking. How many of those opportunities can we develop? Can we collaborate with a supplier, with a carrier, to find out where we can, whether it's us, the supplier, a combination of the two, to provide our own infrastructure. But that reduces the stem mileage, or reduces the range that we're able to hit, until I think that three-way collaboration between, governments, whatever that kind of sort of national infrastructure, the carrier and the shipper occurs, we're not going to be able to break that sort of, the European cross-border transport that really will start to make the big impacts on our carbon reductions.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think that's a perfect example of finding those closed loops with your tight partners and making it work for those, right? Maybe one final topic before we go to, our final thoughts, is how to deal with the financing. So as we know, an electric truck is much more expensive as an upfront cost, but the real value is in, the fuel pricing and the maintenance. And looking at the total cost of ownership, there's still the financial hurdle at the front. So how to finance these trucks. Do you have any examples of how you're helping carriers, or longer contracts, or residual value guarantees? Like, any suggestions that you have for the audience on how to overcome that initial hurdle of the upfront cost that is steep compared to diesel at the moment?
See, I can give a crack at answering that. I think the immediate feedback we had when we had everyone together was longer term contracts, because they're big investments. And so actually realizing that doing a year or 2-year terms like the old world isn't going to cut it when you're doing these significant. So actually trying to get a head round, when we're doing biogas deals, and maybe they're 5 or 10-year deals now, which is unheard of for us. In transport, we're just starting to tender, but looking at longer term deals as an option and unlock for a third party. So if we said to somebody when we tender, right, here's the tender volume, but we want X percentage in electric, and we're going to do it over in this term, does that help? I think because you can't just do the same deals as we've done in the past. We have to change what the responsibility is on us to catalyze that change, I think. Otherwise, we're just going to carry on and expect shippers to do all the changes. I think it needs both sides of the party to make those changes, to be honest, and start the discussion on do different, rather than trying to just carry on doing what we've always done. That's the only way to make this happen, I think.
If I could just build on that as well, I think it's a really good point, Mark. And I think one thing we're trying to do as big shippers is also trying to broker the conversations with our customers. And I think by putting this at the top of the agenda, we're having much more meaningful conversations with our customers to see what they can do to help us, whether it be, I don't know, create green lanes to get better efficiency with our vehicles, to, as you said, the assets are more expensive. So how can we get better efficiency out of the rest of the operation? So I suppose it's a fourth part that we bring into the conversation. And again, it's our responsibility as our community to broker those conversations to really make it end to end.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think is shows the whole supply chain that it's a conversation and it's a shared responsibility, both at the start of procuring and thinking, what do you need with regards to contract length, or and with the customers, like, can we change some of the agreements that belong to the old world, which I really like and I'll keep using, and how do we transition that into the new world? We've come to very close to the end of our panel, and I'd just like to invite each of the speakers to really, share one thought or one sentence of what, if anything, you want the audience to walk away with from this panel. And I'll start with you, Mark. What is the one thing you want people to remember from this panel?
It's quite clear in my mind is that I think we're all have been waiting for other people to come up with the solution and take the action, and we're going to go and use that because it's the best one. If we all did that, we wouldn't get anywhere. So test and learn and try something different that's the only way we're going to make a difference.
Thank you. Luke, would you like to share as well?
Very similar to Mark, it's words out of my mouth. No one party can do this alone, and collaboration will be key. It needs to be fully end-to-end with carriers, shippers, governments and customers that are going to make this work.
Thank you very much. And Mark Mulder?
Yeah, what else can I say? Go create the future is basically what it's all about. And in this transition phase, it is about every party in the supply chain, and perhaps even parties that we don't think of being normally part of the supply chain. So think about providers of electricity. Let us get around the table together, design that solution, and have a longer term view than only, let's say, the less longer term view, let me put it like that, that we normally have within this fragmented industry. And that will only, at the end of the day, assist us all in making this transition to further decarbonizing the supply chain. So co-creation, test, adapt, and evolve.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Reuters again for this opportunity to share this webinar with you. I'd like to thank our speakers. And with that, we've come to the end of this webinar. Have a really great day. Thank you.